It starts to feel like the more effort you put in, the more they drift away. You send the message, you wait, you replay every word in your head, you check your phone again, still nothing. So you try harder. You explain more, you express more love, you give more of your time and energy, and yet they grow colder, more distant, more difficult to reach. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself why this keeps happening? Stay with this thought, because once you understand what is really happening in their mind, everything about how you respond will begin to change. Right now it feels deeply personal. It feels like rejection, like being ignored, like somehow you are not enough. That feeling hurts, and that pain pushes you to react. You think maybe if you block them, they will finally realize your value. Maybe if you explain yourself one more time, they will understand. Maybe if you show even more care, they will come closer. But every one of these actions is being driven by fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being forgotten, fear of being replaced, and fear has a very specific pattern. It rushes you, it pushes urgency, it convinces you that if you do not act now, everything will slip away. So you react. You send long messages, you ask for reassurance, you look for clarity, you try to hold tighter, but here is the uncomfortable truth. The tighter you hold, the faster they pull away, because you are not dealing with someone who responds well to pressure. You are dealing with someone who retreats from it. When emotions intensify, they do not move closer, they move back. When things feel heavy, they do not lean in, they shut down. So when you block them, it does not shake them the way you expect. It often just gives them more room. When you plead, it does not bring them closer, it overwhelms them. When you chase, it does not create attraction, it activates their instinct to escape. And now you are stuck in a loop. You reach out, they withdraw. You try again, they go quiet. You push harder, they disappear further. Each cycle leaves you feeling more broken. You begin questioning yourself. You wonder what you did wrong. You start believing that maybe you are too much, too emotional, too intense, too needy. But the reality is different. You are not too much. You are simply trying to give and receive love in a way that feels natural to you, from someone who does not process it the same way. That mismatch creates confusion and tension. You believe love should be expressed openly, spoken clearly, and reassured often. But for someone avoidant, love feels safer at a distance. So when you step closer, believing you are building connection, they feel like they are losing control. And control for them is everything. That is why they become quiet. That is why they delay responses. That is why they create space, not always because they do not care, but because closeness triggers discomfort they do not understand. Here is where most people unintentionally make things worse. They take that distance personally. They assume it means rejection. They assume it means loss. They assume it signals the end. So they react emotionally, and that reaction becomes the very reason the other person pulls away even more. Because now it is not just closeness they are avoiding, it is the pressure, the intensity, and the expectation that comes with it. Think about it. Every time they step back, you try to fix it faster. Every time they go silent, you become louder. Every time they create distance, you rush to close the gap. But what if that is exactly what pushes them further? What if everything you have been doing is unintentionally driving them away? This is the part many people never hear. You cannot chase someone who is wired to run. You cannot convince someone who shuts down under pressure. You cannot force a connection where emotional safety is missing. And the more you try, the more you lose your own sense of stability. Slowly, without noticing, your focus shifts away from yourself and onto them. You start monitoring everything. Their replies, their tone, their mood, their distance. Your emotional state becomes tied to how they show up. That is where the real damage begins. Because now you are no longer grounded. You are reacting, waiting, hoping, chasing. And the more you operate from that place, the less attractive you become, not because you lack worth, but because you are no longer steady. Avoidant people feel that shift immediately. They sense the urgency, the emotional demand, the pressure to respond or match your intensity, and instead of rising to meet it, they withdraw even more. They become colder, quieter, harder to reach, leaving you confused and searching for answers. But here is the turning point. The moment you recognize that this pattern is not random, things begin to make sense. It is not about saying more or doing more. It is not about proving your value. It is about understanding what actually nurtures connection and what silently breaks it. Because right now, without realizing it, you may be feeding the very cycle that is hurting you, and until that changes, nothing else will. Not your words, not your effort, not your intentions. The shift begins when your response changes. What makes this even more difficult is that their silence often feels colder than any rejection. Because avoidant people rarely give clear answers. They do not say they are scared. They do not admit that closeness feels overwhelming. They do not explain that deeper emotions trigger patterns they never learned to manage. Instead, they become vague. They say they are busy. They ask for space. One day they seem engaged, the next day they feel distant. That inconsistency keeps you hooked because the human mind struggles more with uncertainty than with pain. Pain is clear. Confusion keeps you stuck. When something is unclear, your mind searches for meaning. It replays conversations, analyzes tone, looks for hidden signs, and asks questions that spiral endlessly. What changed? Was it something I said? Did I ruin this? That is how emotional fixation begins, not always from love, but from the absence of closure. This is where avoidant dynamics can become deeply draining, especially for someone who values emotional depth. Your heart wants honesty, your mind wants clarity, but their behavior offers neither. So you begin chasing understanding instead of connection. The problem is, clarity cannot be forced from someone who avoids their own feelings. They might care, they might think about you, they might even miss you. But if they have not learned to sit with emotional discomfort, they will keep avoiding anything that feels too real. That is why they can seem interested and then disappear. That is why they can open up and then suddenly shut down. That is why they can come close and then act like nothing happened. To you, it feels inconsistent. To them, it feels like self-protection. An avoidant nervous system often interprets intimacy as pressure. Emotional depth feels heavy, demanding, and potentially overwhelming. So when feelings deepen, their reaction happens internally before they can even explain it. They withdraw, detach, or go numb. If you do not understand this pattern, you will misinterpret everything. You will believe their distance means you should try harder. But in reality, the more you push, the less safe they feel, not because your love is wrong, but because they were never taught how to receive steady closeness without fear. Many avoidant individuals learned early in life that relying on others is risky. Maybe their emotional needs were ignored. Maybe vulnerability was not safe. Maybe they had to become independent too soon. So they built an internal system that says, do not depend, do not reveal too much, do not get too attached. Now, even when they meet someone genuine, that system remains active. When your warmth reaches them, part of them wants it, while another part wants to run. That internal conflict creates the hot and cold behavior that leaves you emotionally exhausted. One part of them desires connection. The other fears losing control. And when someone is unhealed, fear usually wins over desire. That is why trying to prove your worth rarely works. You think if you love them enough, reassure them enough, and stay patient enough, they will eventually feel safe. But healing does not happen simply because someone else gives more love. A person can be deeply cared for and still remain emotionally unavailable. That truth is difficult to accept because effort feels meaningful and sacrifice feels noble. But loyalty without self-respect slowly turns into self-abandonment. Many people do not realize this until they are already drained. Their sleep suffers, their focus fades, their mood depends on notifications, their sense of peace becomes tied to someone else's inconsistency. At that point, it is no longer love. It becomes emotional captivity. Your nervous system gets trapped in their unpredictability. You live in reaction mode. One message gives hope, one delay creates anxiety, one cold response triggers doubt, and one small sign pulls you back in again. This cycle can feel intense, even passionate, but it is often anxiety disguised as connection. Real connection does not leave you in constant confusion. Real connection does not make you feel like you must earn basic presence. Real connection does not punish you for wanting honesty. This is where your power starts to return, the moment you stop romanticizing what is actually destabilizing you. Because if someone only feels comfortable at a distance, then your closeness is not the issue. Their unresolved fear is. That realization changes everything. You stop internalizing their behavior. You stop believing you are not enough, and you begin to see that they were simply not equipped to meet you where you stand. The deepest damage in these situations does not come from them pulling away. It comes from what you begin to believe about yourself during the process. You start shrinking, doubting, and editing your emotions to seem easier to handle. You become less expressive, less honest, less yourself. You hide feelings, you hold back words, you pretend you are okay when you are not. Slowly, you lose touch with who you are, all to maintain a connection that asks you to disappear. And that should never be the cost of being loved. You should not have to become smaller to stay in someone's life. If someone can only remain when you expect less, feel less, and need less, then what they are offering is not partnership. It is convenience. You are not meant to live on emotional fragments. You are meant for something steady, something mutual, something calm. But first, you have to break the cycle. You have to stop treating their distance as a challenge to solve. Because once you start trying to decode them, you give away your power. Your mind becomes consumed with strategy, timing, and overthinking every move. And now your life revolves around someone who cannot even show up consistently. That cost is too high. What you need now is not more effort, but emotional discipline, the strength to stop feeding a pattern that is draining you. The answer is not in another long message, another explanation, or another attempt to be understood. The answer begins the moment you stop reacting the same way. And when that shift happens, everything changes. Because the real transformation begins the moment you stop trying to control the outcome. Because the real power in this situation is not about getting them to come back. It is about refusing to lose yourself while they are stepping away. Most people assume strength means saying the perfect thing. They think power comes from one final message that suddenly makes everything clear for the other person. They believe that if they find the right words, the right timing, the right emotional tone, the distance will just disappear. But that belief is exactly what keeps them stuck. They are still handing over their peace to someone else, still waiting for the other person to choose them before choosing themselves. And that is the point where everything has to shift. The strongest move is not louder emotion. It is restraint. It is the moment you feel the urge to chase, and you do not. It is the moment your mind starts spinning panic stories and you stay grounded anyway. It is when your heart wants to run after them, but your self-respect keeps you still. That stillness is not weakness. It is control. Because most people cannot do it. Most people are led by emotional impulse. They react instantly. They send the text. They check the profile. They try to fix the silence because silence feels unbearable. But real growth starts when you stop escaping discomfort through action. That is what emotional discipline actually is, not pretending you do not care, not becoming cold or detached, not playing psychological games. It is simply not betraying your own peace just because someone else has gone quiet. And when you begin doing that, something important shifts inside you. Your nervous system starts to settle. You stop feeding anxiety. You stop rewarding confusion. You stop making someone else's inconsistency the center of your emotional world. That shift alone changes your energy more than any message ever could. Because when you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And predictable emotional panic is something many avoidant patterns unconsciously depend on. They are used to people chasing, explaining, reacting, and trying to pull them back. They expect emotional pursuit. They expect long messages. They expect pressure. But when that does not come, when there is no emotional collapse, no chasing, no over-explaining, something unfamiliar happens. For the first time, they are left alone with their own silence. And that silence feels different now, not chaotic, not pressured, just clear, just still, just free of emotional demand. That kind of absence carries weight, because now they are no longer reacting to your emotions. They are sitting with the space you left behind, and that often reveals more than pressure ever could. Not because silence is a tactic, but because absence of reaction exposes truth. It shows whether there was real connection or just emotional dependency loops. That is why the hardest thing to do is often the simplest in form, but hardest in execution. Do nothing, not from defeat, but from self-control. Not because you are giving up, but because you are stepping out of a pattern that has been draining you. And patterns lose power the moment you stop feeding them. Think about how much mental energy gets spent decoding behavior, how much of your time disappears into waiting, how much peace gets lost in overthinking every detail, how much self-worth gets tied to temporary replies or silence. Now imagine reclaiming all of that energy. Imagine no longer analyzing someone who has not learned to understand themselves. That is where your center starts to return. And when you come back to yourself, your presence naturally changes. You become calmer, steadier, less available to emotional chaos. That kind of energy is noticeable even without words. It creates contrast, because people often do not feel your value fully when you are constantly trying to prove it. But they start to sense it when your attention is no longer easily accessible, not because you are pretending, but because you are grounded. There is a big difference between performance and stability. Performing distance is ego-driven. Stepping back with self-respect is alignment. One is manipulation, the other is integrity. And even people who avoid emotional depth can feel that difference. They notice when your energy is no longer chasing them. They notice when your emotional world is no longer revolving around their inconsistency. They notice when you are no longer trying to force connection. And that is often when curiosity begins to appear. Not because you begged for attention, but because your absence spoke clearly. Not because you demanded presence, but because your withdrawal showed value without explanation. This is what many miss. Emotional stability is deeply attractive. Not loud, not dramatic, not reactive, but steady. Because steadiness creates safety. And safety is something avoidant patterns often struggle to maintain internally, yet still recognize when they see it externally. So when you stop reacting from panic and start holding yourself with calm self-control, the entire emotional atmosphere changes. The dynamic is no longer driven by fear. It is driven by boundaries. And boundaries do not shout. They do not explain endlessly. They do not chase. They simply exist. They say, without words, that you will not abandon yourself just to keep a connection alive. And that one internal decision quietly transforms everything, because you are no longer trying to be chosen at any cost. You are becoming someone who only stays where emotional peace can exist. That level of self-respect changes your entire internal structure. Desperation fades. Attachment loosens. You stop reaching from emptiness. You stop shrinking for approval. You stop mistaking access for love. If they return, it will no longer feel like victory or validation. It will feel like information. You will observe instead of react. You will notice their energy instead of idolizing their return. You will see whether anything has actually changed or if it is just another repetition of the same cycle, and this time, hope will not cloud your judgment. Awareness will lead. Because once you step out of emotional chaos, you begin to recognize it instantly when it tries to re-enter your space. You feel it in your body first, that subtle tension, that slight discomfort, that quiet unease you once ignored. Before, you pushed past those signals to keep connection alive. Now you listen to them because they were never weakness. They were guidance. They were showing you what your mind used to rationalize away. That is how you protect yourself without becoming emotionally closed off. You stay open, but not unguarded. You stay kind, but not self-sacrificing. You stay present, but not attached to uncertain outcomes. That balance is rare, and it changes everything. Now, if they reach out, you are not chasing validation. You are observing presence. You are not asking if they want you. You are asking if they can meet you where you stand. That shift alone can save years of emotional exhaustion, because the real goal was never to make someone choose you. The real goal is to choose what is healthy for you. And once you begin living from that perspective, your standards rise naturally. Confusion stops feeling normal. Distance stops feeling like love. Inconsistency stops feeling acceptable. You begin to value peace over intensity, and that is where everything starts to stabilize. Now there are only two outcomes. Either they move closer with consistency and real effort, or they remain exactly who they have always been. If they move closer, you will notice it clearly. More consistency, more presence, more intention, not perfection, but effort that is real and steady. And that kind of effort does not require chasing or guessing. It simply meets you. But if nothing changes, if distance remains the same, if inconsistency continues, then clarity replaces confusion. You are no longer asking why they behave a certain way. You are accepting that this is who they are right now, and that acceptance is not loss. It is freedom. Because you stop waiting for potential. You stop investing in imagination. You stop building hope around what could be. You face what is actually present, not with emotion, but with honesty. And honesty brings peace because it allows decisions that support your well-being instead of your attachment. You no longer stay because of hope. You stay only if reality feels right. If it does not, you walk away without needing closure from them. Because you already understand enough. You understand that love should not cost your stability. You understand that connection should not feel like uncertainty. You understand your own value more clearly now. That awareness changes how you move forward. You become more selective, more grounded, more intentional. You stop chasing emotional intensity and start choosing emotional safety. And that is where life shifts in a lasting way. Because once emotional instability is no longer accepted as normal, space opens for something healthier, something calmer, something consistent, something real. Not something you fight to keep alive every day, but something that naturally aligns with you. And the most important part is this. You are no longer waiting for someone to complete you. You have already returned to yourself, and from that place, nothing external defines your worth anymore. Not silence, not distance, not rejection. Because your identity is no longer built around someone else's presence or absence. It stands on its own, steady, grounded, unshaken. And from there, everything you allow into your life becomes a choice, not a need. And that is where real direction begins.